So, without further ado, I'm just gonna hop right into it. It's a really, really short chapter tonight. For those of you just tuning in, I'm currently doing a live reading of my dad's manuscript, one of the many. This one is The Sword and the Rose, and I'm almost finished it up. So if you are just tuning in, you'll want to go back to my previous broadcasts and take a look at my my other chapters. There was also another book I did before that as well, so you can go and watch that as well on this channel. So, without further ado, Chapter 24 of The Sword and the Rose. If you don't mind, I'd prefer it if you take us out of Gwila's Hole as near directly as possible. We'll be traveling across the most heavily populated area of Wardic Barony, my Lord Baron. I'd still prefer to get there before Wardic himself can arrive. I'll do my best, my lord. As they had done on the voyage to Wardic Castle, they found a place to hide for the night while they rested. They did what they could for Jadal, but he had few open wounds, but was bruised all over his upper body, arms, and shins. As I said, my Lord Baron, I'm not skilled in healing magic. I'll do what I can, though. If we had time, I could look up a few herbs and make a proper soothing ointment. But if we were wishing for such things, why not wish for a spell to take us back to Grandel Castle in one night? Jadal woke up briefly the next morning while they were in flight, and the sudden sight of familiar faces threw him into a panic. Pemberlin put a quick sleep spell on him before he could get too agitated. The magician looked at Gwalsor. Sleep will be the best thing for him. When we pause at noon, I'll wake him and we'll see how he does then. When Pemberlin woke the boy at noon, he was confused. My Lord Baron, how did you come to be a prisoner here? Look around, Jadal. You are free, and so are we. We are on our way to Gwila's Hole. But Baron Wardic said I was being held until you gave up Gwila's Hole. Baron Wardic has said a number of things, and has done some things for which he will be held to account. But we came down and we rescued you. The boy looked around. No, Jadal, the Baron forestalled his protest. There was no time to send a force of mounted men, so the 5 of us, by means of Master Pemberlin's art, have come down and brought you out of this prison. Jadal was even more horrified to find that they were all riding on a flying table, and it was clear that he was having trouble holding down what little lunch he had eaten. If you intend to throw up, young master, might I suggest you lean over the edge of the table so as not to discommode your fellow travelers? Something about Pemberlin's quiet but firm approach helped Jadal to buck himself up, and soon he was sleeping again. During the flight, there was ample time for thinking, and Gwalsor continued to fret a little over the question of whether he ought to have mustered his forces, battered as they were from the rebellion. There would be widows, old men, children out tending the fields that young men ought to be caring for, and there might well be hunger in some of the hamlets next year. Then again, Wardic had hoped to gain his demands because Grandel had just been through a rebellion and might not be able to muster the troops to fight. And Wardic might just feel that, though he had lost his hostage, he might still be able to gain his demands by fighting for them. So Grandel must be ready to fight as well. There were hardships and possible complications, whichever way Gwalsor moved. With luck, he could see to it that the mustering of the troops would cause less problems than any other option. Nor was it purely altruistic concern for his people. If Wardic continued to press, the barony could be worn down over the course of years to the point where it could no longer defend itself. For the rest of that day, Jadal slept, waking only to eat and drink. In the middle of the night, though, there was a wordless shout that brought them all suddenly awake. Jadal was thrashing about under his bedclothes, shouting against something or someone. Gwalsor shook the boy's shoulder until he opened his eyes, and even then Jadal did not recognize where he was. Jadal, you're safe now. We've got you out of Wardic Castle. Salder's tears, give us some light here. Pemberlin, look here. Jadal, it's me, Gwalsor, and Melga, and Pemberlin, and Tostig. Come on now. Look at me, boy. Yes, that's better. You're safe now. Go back to sleep. Gwalsor sat beside Jadal until the page finally slept. The next day, Jadal spent more time waking. I believe Wardick was hoping you wouldn't ransom me, he told Gwalsor once. He'd have brought me to him at any hour of the day or night and questioned me about the forces Grandal had available and the losses we'd taken in the rebellion. I told him nothing, my Lord Baron. Jadal's eyes looked up at him, beseeching to be believed. Gwalsor nodded. You did well, boy. It hardly mattered if Jadal had told Wardick everything he knew. Wardick almost certainly had spies in Grandal, just as Melguthap was managing spies in Wardick Barony, and they each probably had a fair idea how the other was outfitted. How are you taken? Jadal frowned. I was talking with a man, a brewer, and it seems he was asking me the best way to... I can't remember the town. He grimaced. Next thing I remember finding myself stuffed in a cask smelling of old ale. There was a bunghole next to my face that let me get more fresh air, but I was dizzy and half drunk during the whole ride. I don't know how far we were into Wardick Barony before we were met by light horsemen. They tied me to a horse and took me along to the castle as fast as they could travel. With 3 spears, 1 sword, and 1 with a club. One has a bow and acts as if he knows how to use it. And we do not have a bow. That's seriously bad. Swordsmen? I think maybe Baron and me can manage both. Spearmen are trouble. Good spearmen have advantage over swordsmen or axemen. Still, if we do right, we can manage. He rapidly explained his plan to them. They came slipping through the dark woods, carefully, quietly. The men who have been cast out of society for whatever reason usually survive by learning the skills of remaining unseen and unheard. They moved into position quickly. One of them hooted like an owl quietly for a signal. Then the bow hummed and an arrow struck one of the blanket-wrapped figures around the remains of the campfire. The rest rushed forward, still not making a sound, until the second arrow struck, when they began shouting as they prepared to fall on the sleepers. There was a grunt where the bowmen had hid. 2 other men, one armed with a sword, the other armed with an axe, rushed out of the brush to fall on the outlaws. To add to the confusion of the thieves, an arrow from the bowman's hiding place struck one of the spearmen. Another of the spearmen took an arrow as he began to engage his swordsman facing him. Then Melguthap, with Chauncey Light, an unfamiliar weapon, and the melee closing, discarded the bow and came charging out of the brush, shouting, "Laksoya!" as he ran. Steel rang and sparked against steel in the grove. Men shouted and screamed. Suddenly it was over. The outlaws were dead. The victors leaned on their arms, catching their breath. Melguthap grinned at Gwalsor. Even most careful hunters sometimes don't look for what hides in the trees above. Just so. Now which do we do? Move our camp a little and leave these here where they lie, or drag the bodies into the brush and keep our campsite? By now Pemberlint, Jadal, and Adak Daw were coming back into the clearing. Jadal had been a little rebellious at the thought of hiding in a tree, but Melguthap had said, "Listen, you cannot stand for sure, not for a fight. Either hide in the tree yourself, or I will knock you on the head and tie you to a branch. Which do you choose?" Jadal had climbed the tree on his own. Late the next afternoon they came to Gwilla's Hole, and found its vicinity crowded with armed men, with banners. Most of the night holders of Grandal Barony flying above them. Okay, so this one's a rougher chapter. I am going to be using a lot more marker on this. But like I said, it was a very, very short chapter. I guess, like I said, this is the first read through. So some things have to get ironed out, and I guess that's one of them. So this is a super short chapter tonight. Anyway, have a good night, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.